Welcome, everyone. We see you entering the webinar. My name is John Uzzini. I'm Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream. We're going to get started in just a minute or two, but thank you for joining us. We'll be right with you.
Please feel free in the chat to enter your name and where you're from, and also what role you play at your institution.
If you're just joining us, if you could use the chat button at the bottom of your screen, tell us your name, your title, and your institution. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a great presentation planned for you today. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and we think this is going to be a great hour together. All right, well, as people are entering their information into the chat, I think I'll get us started. Again, welcome. My name is John Uzzini. I'm Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream. We're thrilled to have such a great turnout of colleagues from across the country and around the world coming together for the third in our series of weekly webinars on online teaching and learning through disruption. The title of today's session is Innovative Approaches to Content Delivery and Assessment of Student Learning. We came up with this topic based on feedback from those of you who were with us last week and the week before. We know these are topics that folks are feeling a lot of urgency around, and we want to do our best to be responsive. Just some background information. As you can see, we're using the Zoom platform for our session today. A couple of things we want you to be familiar with. At the bottom of your screen in the center, you'll see an option for chat. That's where we're asking you right now, if you haven't already, to please post your name, your title, and the name of your institution. There's also an option down there for Q&A. And so a little bit later, we'll be asking you what questions you have about what we've presented, what ideas you want to share from your own experiences, and we'll focus you at that point on either the Q&A button or the chat button at the bottom of the screen. In the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see audio settings. The settings for this webinar have everyone muted and everyone's camera off. That's partially for security and also partially for bandwidth issues. We want to keep this running as smoothly as possible. But note that there are options for your settings down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. So again, I want to welcome you. I do want to just give you a little bit of background about our organization, Achieving the Dream. We know that most of you are at Achieving the Dream colleges from across the US, but what we have seen over the past few weeks, and we're very excited to see, is that we are being joined by some colleagues who are not part of the Achieving the Dream network. So we just want you to know that we are a network of community colleges, technical colleges, and tribal colleges and universities. We work with over 277 colleges in 44 states and the District of Columbia. Our work impacts over 4 million students, and we do this work with a staff of over 50 based in Silver Spring, Maryland and Portland, Oregon, and with 60 coaches around the country. We are committed to helping students at these institutions, particularly low-income students and students of color, achieve their goals for academic success, personal growth, and economic opportunity. And we do this work with a model that involves coaching institutions and leaders and faculty and others at these institutions, continuing to do innovative work in partnership with these institutions, and using a model that helps these institutions connect with each other to leverage the power of this network. And that's part of what we intend to do in sessions like this today. The model that you see on the left-hand corner, the left side of your screen, is our institutional capacity framework. And our theory of change is that to the extent that colleges can build capacity in the 7 areas you see in that wheel, that it leads them towards building a more student-focused culture, a student-centered culture, a learner-centered culture at their institutions. So I'm going to ask our CEO and president, Dr. Karen Stout, to share some thoughts for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on to our plans for today's session. Karen?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to especially welcome a number of our colleagues who are joining us from South Africa. I watched you introduce yourself in the chat, and it's good to have you as part of this, this community. As John mentioned, we're excited about today's topic because it was shaped by our conversations with you in the previous 2 webinars. I want to just share 2 insights. One is an insight that's coming from a national conversation that I'm part of as part of ATD's membership in something called the Washington Higher Education Secretariat, where we're doing a lot of conversation on the use of the pass-fail grade and ensuring that that pass-fail grade can be transferable in this new context. And that's groundbreaking conversation with 4-year colleges that perhaps we could have never had before COVID. So that leads me to this quote that comes from a book by David White that I'm reading right now that was written in 2001. And the book is called Crossing the Unknown Sea, Work as a Pilgrimage of Identity. And he says, you set sail on another ocean without star or compass, going where the argument leads, shattering the certainties of centuries. And that's certainly what you are doing as faculty now. And so I challenge you and your teams, including the leaders of our Centers for Teaching and Learning that are beginning to emerge as real leaders in our work around teaching and learning, to take this opportunity to collect as much data as you can about the student learning experience. And I don't mean quantitative data, I really mean qualitative data, and understanding the impediments students find in their ability to learn, as well as the impediments faculty are finding in their ability to teach in this environment. This is a learning opportunity like no other that we've had in higher education, perhaps since post-World War II and the founding of the community college movement and the introduction of the GI Bill. A president this morning talked to me about developing a matrix that she's journaling around. And I think this could be good for the faculty on this call. There's a column that's before COVID, the way we did things before COVID. There's a column, what we're doing now as a result of COVID. And then there's another column that's after COVID. So an example of that might be before COVID, we were doing a lot of placement testing in our sector using AccuPlacer, experimenting with multiple measures. Now we are doing a lot of multiple measures. Most of us have jettisoned placement testing, and we're doing that because of the difficulty around administering placement testing. So the question is, what happens after COVID? How do we sustain some of these models that we think are working and also improving equitable access to our colleges and equitable access to the programs and courses and competencies that our students are desperately need, especially now. So try that framework before, after, and then what you want to keep after COVID. I think we're going to see higher ed and our work transformed, and that's because of our collective commitment to learning as we go through this. So it's great to join you, and I can't wait to listen in and watch the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the webinar series. We know that some of you have been with us for each of the sessions we've done over the past 3 weeks. For some of you, this may be your first week with us. This is a weekly series we created. We want to focus on the needs of faculty and staff and students. This is an unprecedented closure of college campuses across the US. And so we are hoping that through these weekly sessions, we're able to come together to provide support to each other, to provide you with strategies and tools that you need to adjust to the educational and social disruptions on your campus. As we've said, connection is so important. We want to use the chat feature in here for people to share questions and ideas. If you haven't yet, please post your name, your title, and your institution in the chat at the bottom of your screen. And as a teaching and learning team, we want to hear from you about your immediate needs so that we can continue to develop just-in-time resources and services that will support you. To that end, on the next screen, you're going to see a screenshot. These are our COVID-19 response resources. There's a link to this on the Achieving the Dream webpage. You'll see the link, the URL is printed for you near the top of the screen. You can find this if you go to achievingthedream.org. And this is an open Canvas site. You do not need to be in the Achieving the Dream Network to access these resources. We're continuing to update this nearly every day with resources gathered by ATD staff and also with what we're hearing from across the Achieving the Dream network. We want to be doing everything we possibly can to support your work through this, and so it's great for us to be hearing from you about what will be most helpful. This is our team. I'm proud to be part of a really amazing team of colleagues at Achieving the Dream. Today's session will be led by Susan Adams, our instructional designer, Francesca Carpenter, our Director of Equity Initiatives, and Richard Sebastian, our Director of Open and Digital Learning. I also want to acknowledge the great work of Rwanda Garth McCullough, our Associate Director of Teaching and Learning, and Shauna Taylor, our Coordinator of Teaching and Learning. You may be interacting with me and Shauna in the background in the chat while Susan and Fran and Richard are presenting today. But I want to thank them. They're wonderful colleagues, and I feel so fortunate to be working with them. Here are our 3 outcomes for today. We hope that you'll leave this webinar with a shared understanding of best practices in accessible and inclusive online assessment, an understanding of how to use formative and summative assessment techniques to mark student progress and to support your students' reflective learning, and also an understanding of how to use free and open digital content in your remote teaching through this crisis. So I'm going to turn it now to my colleague, Susan Adams, and she'll get us started.
Many of you were part of our last 2 webinars where we framed them through 3 basic elements of teaching online. So briefly revisiting those, we presented the connection, content, and context. We touched on how to get content to your students online, how to provide context for that content through direct instruction online, and last week we covered how to communicate with your students online. Today, we're diving more deeply into the content element by exploring ways to effectively create online assessments. As we take a deep dive into creating effective online assessments, I can't emphasize enough the reminder that online teaching is not about the technology. It is about how we use technology to create digital learning experiences and authentic assessments. And again, we can do this with a combination of facilitation and design choices to create a space where students feel seen, connected, and supported. We can't always do the same thing online. Some assignments are no longer possible, some expectations are no longer reasonable, and some objectives are no longer valuable. We'll present strategies to spark your creativity today and invite flexibility, as well as compassionate expectations. So we'll start with kind of an overview of online assessment best practices. One is to start with going back to your learning outcomes and designing your assessments from there. And also prioritize real-world issues and topics in your activity and project design, also known as authentic assessments. A great example I received from a colleague of mine who's an online educator, Maha Bali from Egypt, and she's having her students do empathy research on other people's experiences of this global phenomenon. This could mean interviewing international folks or others around them, like parents, shop owners, friends in other institutions, or even kids. She also suggests doing an autoethnographic research on their own experiences and feelings learning online for the first time in various different courses. Or they can focus on other elements of their online learning experience. Again, this is authentic, real-world issues that we can bring into the classroom as an assignment. It's also important in these times to ask students if they would rather not focus on COVID-19 and change to other topics, and they might change their mind throughout. Allowing for that flexibility and again, compassionate expectations is warranted right now. Also encourage research and original thinking instead of memorization in your assessments. If possible, embed work integrated learning experiences in your course, if at all, with local employer partnerships or even virtual internships that are starting to pop up. And also administer short assessments. So if you are going to assess online, do short and different types periodically so that students can assess their progress. And as always, be transparent. Explain to students how completing assignments and assessments will help them achieve their learning outcomes.
Hello. So it is important to remember that going online can present some equity challenges for our students, especially those with differing abilities. There are a few things that you should keep in mind and consider when going fully online with assessments. Some of your students may have needed accommodations in the physical classroom, and we need to be mindful of that as we teach them online. We are assessing in new and innovative ways in a lot of cases. So it's important to first develop a clear statement to students that you are open to hearing their concerns regarding any proposed alternative assessment methods, especially where accessibility is an issue, and provide a clear channel of contact for those students to communicate with you about their needs. Second, we need to establish a clear and open line of communication. So that if accessibility concerns are raised, you can liaise with the disability or accessibility office at your institution for advice. Third, we really want you to know your students. So offer your students a choice in how they reach your learning outcomes. For example, the choice to either submit a written assignment or deliver a video or audio presentation. This will support equity for students with disabilities and guarantee that students have options that should they need to meet technical or accessibility changes or challenges with any given format. Fourth, wherever possible, we ask that you create and provide students with a sample assessment submission for any alternative assessments you're developing so that they have clarity on what is expected of them. Next, we ask you to be aware that the use of timed online testing is highly problematic for many students with disabilities. And next, we ask that you really vary your assessment type. And we will dive deeper into various types of assessment in just a moment. So here we are with assessment types. We're going to talk about two different assessment types today and give you some practical examples to help you develop these assessments quickly. The first one is formative assessment. So we know that formative assessment occurs throughout a class or course, and it seeks to improve student achievement of learning objectives through approaches that can support specific student needs. So formative assessments are essentially tools that identify misconceptions, struggles, and learning gaps along the way and assess how students can close those gaps. It includes effective tools for helping to shape learning and can even bolster students' abilities to take their own ownership of their learning. So we know that formative assessments should be offered as often as possible. They are a powerful form of practice for students that help them evaluate their learning progress and become more self-regulating. They help students understand that the goal is to improve learning, not only to receive a final grade. And it's especially important right now when students may feel less connected to their instructors and to their peers. Formative assessments create more stability in a time when students are experiencing a high level of uncertainty. And also, you as an instructor can create a low stakes back and forth feedback loop with your students, and that will help them measure their own progress. The next set of assessments are summative. So when most of us hear the word assessment, we think of summative assessments. Summative assessments evaluate student learning, knowledge, proficiency, or success at the conclusion of an instructional period, a unit, a course, or a program. They're often the most heavily weighted, and we know that they are finite and fixed. Now, summative assessments can be used in conjunction with formative assessments, and it really helps to make sure that the content is aligned with the goals of the course. So for formative assessment best practices, we ask that you keep a clear criteria for what defines good performance. So similar to what you would do normally in your face-to-face classes, we want you to add that extra layer of communication with your students. Explain your grading, your rubrics, your criteria in discussion pods or by email, whatever works best for your students. We want you to encourage your students' self-reflection. Now, instructors can ask students to utilize course criteria to evaluate their own peers' work, to share what kind of feedback they find most valuable. We also ask that students describe the qualities of their best work, either through writing or through a group discussion. Students can develop learning journals that track their learning, and then that is also one form of formative assessment. And this can be done online in private discussion threads or by email between the student and the instructor. In formative assessment, it also allows students to take ownership over their learning, which I mentioned earlier. It's providing them with assessment options and letting them choose what they are reasonably able to complete based on their current circumstance. This is important because we know that some students are struggling with access to the internet, bandwidth, managing family and job commitments that they may not have had to deal with prior to this pandemic. Formative assessments give students detailed and actionable feedback. Instructors can consistently provide specific feedback tied to their predefined criteria that is listed in your syllabus. Feedback may be corrective and forward-looking rather than just evaluative. Examples can include comments on paper drafts, criteria on discussions, and using one-on-one check-ins and regular online quizzes. We ask that you encourage teacher and peer dialogue around learning. Instructors can invite students to discuss the formative learning process together. Next, we're asking that you promote positive motivational beliefs and self-esteem. Students will be more motivated and engaged when they are assured that their instructor cares for their development and their learning. Instructors can allow for rewrites and resubmissions to signal that an assessment or an assignment is designed to promote the development of learning. And then these rewrites might utilize low-stake assessments, what we talked about before with the formative types. And then you can provide opportunities to close gaps between current and desired performance. Next, you can collect information which can be used to help shape your teaching. And this goes back to knowing your students, and it allows them to identify where they're having difficulties, either on an assignment or a test or a written submission. And this approach promotes metacognition, as students are able and asked to think about their own learning. One form of a formative assessment is a 1-minute paper. Now, as we dig deeper into the types and the strategies of techniques, I'm going to go over a few, and then Susan is going to review a few. This first one on the screen is the 1-minute paper, and the goal of this assessment is to get a feel for whether your students have captured the most important points in a lesson, and for the student to identify which areas they need further support or instruction. So an example of the 1-minute paper is on the left side of your screen. Essentially, students are asked to take 1 minute or more to answer 2 questions. What was the most important thing they learned this week, and what still remains unclear to them? So you can structure the questions however you like and vary them depending on your subject matter. Next two are the muddiest point and the 1-sentence summary. So the muddiest point allows students to write one learning concept that was unclear to them after a particular lesson or group of lessons. This can also be effective when applied to reading assignments or math subjects in particular. The goal of this strategy is to help assess where students are having difficulties so that you can offer additional assistance or steer them in a different direction. The next is the 1-sentence summary, and it allows students to demonstrate their understanding of an idea or concept by writing only 1 sentence to capture the most important elements. Students write a sentence that answers the questions of who, when, where, how, and why. The goal of this strategy is to form a concise summary of what they just learned.
The technology options for each one of these is to submit them via email. So the 1-minute paper could be submitted via email or within an LMS assignment tool, or even a post in a discussion forum. The muddiest point can also be submitted via email, or you could generate a weekly quiz or survey in your LMS and select the short answer question framework for students to complete the muddiest point question. The 1-sentence summary could also be emailed or a weekly forum post set so students cannot see their peers post until they post. There are multiple settings in the LMS to consider. when doing assessments, and we'll talk about some of those in a moment. Another great technology is called collaborative learning technologies, CLTs. And we've talked a lot about shared documents, but in groups or pairs, students can view, read, and analyze their peers' work and offer feedback in the form of short notes or verbal comments on a shared document or even presentation. So multiple students can access, develop, and edit that same document or PowerPoint slide deck, which provides unique opportunities for feedback, all shared on one digital space. So the instructor first chooses the place that will house where the artifacts will be posted or linked. It could be done with Google Slides, Padlet, dot storming, real-time boards, or just to name some of the few free collaborative learning technologies available to you. And then the instructor would provide the link to that space in an email or in an LMS. Some of the summative assessment best practices overarching is to think about options based on knowing your students and their capacity. And that gets into the adaptability and the flexibility that we ask in really knowing who your students are. Also consider design strategies that discourage cheating. And consider smaller, shorter exams. So some examples would be online exams, problem-based exams, portfolios, or a gallery walk. If you're going to do a quiz or an exam online, there are some high-tech options of Respondus and lockdown browsers. But again, in the LMS, you do have an option in the quiz and exams tool to randomize the question order, also randomize the answer order, which you'll need to then omit all of the above options. You can also time limit, which we do discourage in these times for students with needing of accommodation. You can also allow for backtracking or allow for multiple attempts. Again, these are things to be thoughtful about, but just know that those settings are available if you have access to an LMS. And thinking about those summative assessment strategies with exams, possibly redesigning multiple choice questions into an open book problem-based exam that requires students to employ original thinking and to solve a challenge or problem. The internet is here with a wealth of knowledge, so really encouraging that critical thinking and exams that do not require that memorization. And exams such as this can be done individually or in teams, or problem-based exams can be mailed. So thinking about low-tech options for students that need that option for you to set up. Portfolios provide a way for students to collect and organize examples of work completed over time. So this could be formative and summative. Portfolios allow students to demonstrate formative and summative progress and achievement, and authors can use tools to present their information in a cohesive and personalized format. If you are going to do a portfolio, be sure to help students set a goal and generate an outline and consider what story they want to tell. And having students add artifacts that are evidence of their work, knowledge, and skills with a description of each artifact. This can be done in an LMS, which often has an ePortfolio tool, or in a shared set of documents linked to artifacts in a shared folder. Again, that gets back to that collaborative learning technologies. We could also do a blog, a website, and doing multimedia to a portfolio with audio messages is always a great way to raise students' digital literacy and competencies.
The next strategy is a gallery walk, and an online gallery walk mimics the traditional poster board and paper gallery walk technique to showcase student work. In an online environment, students are able to showcase various forms of media with the instructor and with their peers. As an instructor, you can create a PowerPoint deck or a Google slide deck, and then assign each student in the class their own slide. Depending on the class size, you can create one deck per class or one per group. So then you should create clear directions on how students should add media files to a slide and how the class can provide feedback. In this case, you can either do it formal feedback or informal feedback, and it can be peer reviewed or just with the instructor. And we ask that you create a rubric once you establish the feedback rules. So then students can upload their piece of media. So it can either be a video, an image, an audio file to their assigned slide, along with their name and a description of that file. So in order to replace the verbal communication that typically takes place during an in-person gallery walk, you can allow students to comment on each other's slides and ask questions for clarification if needed. So the next is compassionate expectations. We know that we discussed a number of formative and summative assessment strategies and how they can be implemented online. I read a quote in the Chronicle for Higher Ed the other day, and I believe it's fitting for our conversation about assessment. So this quote reads, "The vast majority of us, albeit under extreme pressure, are clarifying what we most want our students to learn, making small and large changes in our teaching, communicating with students more than ever before to find out what is and isn't working for them, and making further adjustments based on what we hear from them." So we ask that you have compassionate expectations for yourself and for your students. Teaching and learning and assessing learning are undergoing major adjustments right now. So to help us make sure we are remaining equity-minded in how we're responding to our students, it's important to consider new grading and assessment strategies, rethinking due dates, and how students submit assignments to you. Ultimately, we all know that we are here to extend a sense of care to our students while building an online digital learning community and preparing them for their futures. It is important to note that our students are living through trauma right now, and teaching and assessing with empathy are one of the kindest things that we can do.
Great. Well, thank you, Susan and Fran. My name is Richard Sebastian. I am the Director of Open and Digital Learning here at Achieving the Dream, and I'm going to talk today about free and open digital content. If you joined us for our first webinar, Susan Adams did a great job of talking about the three basic elements of online instruction. One of those was content, and she asked, as a kind of guiding question, how will you get content to students in the easiest and most accessible way? And then how will students engage with that content? So when we're talking about content, in addition to what we just heard about assessing students, and it could include, assessment content, we also include textbooks, labs, graded assignments, exams, any materials that you may use to support student learning. And I think one issue that really this crisis has thrown into stark relief is college students' access to educational content, particularly digital access, as well as access to the flexible use of this content in ways that none of us anticipated at the beginning of the semester. Also, educational leaders are right now, they're currently considering the economic impacts of these campus closures on their institutions and on students, and thinking about strategies for reducing costs for the lean economic times that are ahead. So today's session on content is really focused on traditional content as well as open digital course content. And consistent with our recommendations throughout this series, I want to kind of focus on short-term, easy to implement solutions for faculty. If you're looking for kind of core content or supplemental content for your course to get through the rest of the term, but also content that might be useful as you begin to plan beyond the end of the semester. So I'm referring to kind of any kind of digital content, and this could be a full course, whole package, right? It could be a module or a section of a course or just supplemental material that you're looking for. It could be standalone, so a web-based link with maybe some print options, or some of this content is integrated into your learning management system, or it could just be a traditional print textbook. And as you're thinking about content for your course, again, those guiding questions are important of thinking about equity and access, and what's the how can students access this content and engage with it. So most traditional textbook and content publishers are currently providing temporary access to their content and platforms that is usually behind a paywall. So there's a list on the slide of really the major publishers that have stepped up and are kind of helping faculty out by kind of providing free access to these materials. There's another link on the slide that's also really worth checking out. It's called, if you're a Gabriel Garcia Marquez fan, Vendor Love in the Time of COVID-19. And it's got really kind of a lot of resources, including kind of free access to video libraries, research databases from both 4 years and community colleges, as well as businesses and organizations in education. So it's definitely worth checking out. Having access to the traditional content is great. If you want to kind of quickly get up and running, or if you had these, platforms or programs in your course, of course, read the fine print. As helpful as the access is, you need to keep in mind that it's temporary. So at some point, the paywalls will go back up, and the same issues around affordability, access, and flexibility of licensed materials will also pop back up. But another option is open content. Now, if you haven't heard of open content, maybe you've heard of it referred to as open educational resources, but it's really any kind of teaching and learning content, research materials, any kind of medium, video, photos, text, that either reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license, such as a Creative Commons license. And this license permits no-cost access, adaptation, as well as redistribution by others. So open content is another kind of option if you're looking for content, but it's also, unlike the traditional content, will remain free and something that you can kind of keep forever. So why go open? Again, I want to really focus on kind of easy solutions. If you're not familiar with OER or haven't implemented it before, provided some kind of really kind of easy to adopt options. But there was a blog post at the Creative Commons blog talking about why now is a great time for open license policies. And a quote is, while some educators can post existing learning materials for their students, the move online requires access to and the legal rights to perpetually use and adapt materials. This brings into focus the essential need for broad access to open educational resources. So these materials are free, they're flexible, they can be easily shared outside of your learning management system or out any kind of paywall. And they also are, you could edit them or revise them to convert them to kind of low-tech formats like print. And there's a great blog post by someone named Steele Wagstaff. He works at an organization called Pressbooks for faculty for, if you want to go kind of open during the kind of campus shutdown. And he has really 4 points to make. With OER and some of the resources I'm going to suggest to you today, they're kind of packaged together, ready to go. So there really is no work involved necessarily for adapting or creating materials. So you don't have to make everything yourself, right? There's plenty of open materials that are available to you. And these materials, again, give you freedom to adapt and use. So as you're kind of trying to remain flexible in this uncertain time and trying to be responsive to your students, this material gives you that flexibility because it's not locked down by copyright. It's not limited by that traditional copyright. He also recommends, and as do I, getting some help from your librarians. They're still kind of, you still have access to them, and they can do a lot to help you out and kind of locate content or help you with that content. And again, really the theme of this series is do what you can to reduce your own anxiety and that of your students. So, don't add too much work for yourself. So the first kind of resource I'd like to recommend, I think it's really the best, is OpenStax. This is out of Rice University. And as you can see, they have peer-reviewed, comprehensive, high-quality course material for pretty much most of the general education courses that you might find at a community college or even a four-year college. These come in a number of different formats, including a low-cost print option, color and black and white. You can have mobile-friendly options, web-based options. And so this content is really ready to go. You can just go to the website and access it, or you can modify it, or you could just extract kind of a module or a unit from one of their textbooks to use in your course if you need to. So it's really kind of easy to get started. They're also offering some additional support, like many of the traditional publishers. So they have a group of partners called OpenStax Allies. So these are homework platforms, lab platforms, other kind of products that kind of work with OpenStax textbook content through kind of some ancillary or homework supports for students. So they're providing those platforms. There's usually a cost of $25, $30 a semester. They're offering those at no cost. And there's also a lot of great community curated resources on this site, which the link I've put on this slide. So faculty kind of contributing their own slides and resources that accompany some of these books. So it's a great first stop if you're looking for content or you're looking for a piece for a course that you're teaching this semester, or if you're planning for a summertime course. It's a great place to go and has a lot of resources. The next organization is Lumen Learning. They are a for-profit company. They have two adaptive courseware platforms. One's called Waymaker and one's called OHM or OHM. And they are providing free access and kind of course setup that they promise they can do within minutes, so they can kind of integrate it into your learning management system if you need to, and you can have your course up and running on the same day. And they're also providing free support if you need that. And that gives you really a full packaged course for many of the kind of core gen ed courses at college. So again, that's another place you might want to go if you're looking for really kind of a whole course solution. You also get the kind of analytics and adaptive features of their platforms. So many, on these webinars, many faculty have asked about online labs, which is really tough. I know that for many institutions, that's they're kind of postponing or canceling those. Some already have some built-in options, but it's how do you convert these kind of really manual or place-based course elements virtually? There are some resources, and these also come from OpenStax. One is SimBio. You have to contact them, so there's their email address on the slide, and they have kind of labs for the OpenStax biology book. So if you're using that, or if you want to check that out, you can email them and get free access for the rest of the spring semester. And another organization called Lab Archives, more like lab manuals that are aligned with the OpenStax biology and chemistry textbooks. Again, you can contact them to see what their free offerings are if you're looking for a lab solution. And finally, the third is Merlot has a collection of virtual laboratory experiences. There's quite a few resources at that link, but you can kind of filter to community college courses, to specific content areas to kind of narrow down some of the options that you'll have for online labs. And then for those of you who may be teaching career and technical courses, there are a number of kind of resources at the Skills Commons site. So they provide courseware by occupation. So if you're looking at a particular occupation, or they have some other ways of kind of finding content that was much of it was produced for the TACT grant in the US from a large multi-year grant where much of this content was created. So if you're looking for career and technical content, that's a good place to start as well. That's a lot. We talked about a lot today on assessments and open content, and I just want to point to, we are still doing these one-to-one virtual consultations. These are for ATD member colleges. But if you need assistance, you have questions about any of these things or any of the topics of our webinar series, you can schedule some time with one of our teaching and learning team, and we'll try to help you out and spend 45 minutes or so with you to answer your questions. Our holistic student support team is doing the same thing. So if you have questions about how to support students off campus with kind of issues related to non-academic or non-classroom issues to support those students, you can also schedule a consultation with them as well. And now we're going to take your questions for the remainder of today's session to see what kind of questions you've had or entered in the chat, anything that we can help you with today during this session. So I think John and Shauna and others have been collecting your questions. And do you have any good ones, John?
Yes, so I want to start on one that came from Trish Joyce asking about e-portfolios for composition students. She's wondering if others, if any of the speakers are familiar with platforms or programs that would be good for this purpose. So essentially e-portfolios that composition students can use in an online platform. And I don't know whether Richard or Susan or Fran has an idea for that, but maybe one of the participants wants to add a suggestion in the chat if they're using e-portfolios online.
I'm realizing we also want to remind folks to do all panelists and attendees. It looks like they are doing that, but there's a drop-down menu to make sure that everybody gets to see your chat offering.
I think I'm not an expert at e-portfolios, but one model that I like is came out of University of Washington called Domain of One's Own, which is essentially the college provided kind of WordPress blog and a URL for students to kind of track learning from all of their courses and kind of aggregated the work over the course of their undergraduate education so that they were kind of generating a portfolio for their entire college experience that they would take with them after they graduated. So they owned that data in that space. But that really was as simple as, starting up a blog and that student had to track their work and assignments and kind of reflect on their learning in the course or in the program.
Thanks, Richard. A couple of people are asking about what resources we'll be making available after today's session. So we will be sending out links that will include the PowerPoint slides, the recording of the session, and the text that you're seeing accumulate in the chat. So if you're seeing, suggestions from colleagues in other parts of the country or questions and you'd like to connect with someone, you'll have the information will be downloaded from that chat, and we will share all of that out by tomorrow morning. We do have a question. Are there any suggestions on how faculty can reach students just to be in touch with them if their students don't have any online access?
One of the technologies we spoke about in the past webinars was the WhatsApp, which is an online, which is an iPhone and Android phone technology that allows you to text multiple people in a group. And you can do it on the default text tool on your phone, but WhatsApp allows you to do video and audio, and it's a little more user-friendly. And that's something that it's free and available to students if you offer that to them. So that's an option there, is to start using phones more readily.
Thank you,
and in
Susan.
the chat, I'm seeing some Facebook Live as an option. And that, it looks like Debbie Aki is using WhatsApp for all of her offsite classes, and it's working well. So that's a great confirmation there.
And another option is phone-based as well, is if you're just trying to reach a student to connect with individual students, is just to call them on their phone if you have their phone number and touch base that way.
And Tracy Miles is reminding me that Canvas does have ePortfolium, it's called Portfolium. Again, that's specific to Canvas, so it's sort of not agnostic, but that's a tech that if you do have Canvas is likely an option your institution could go with if you want to integrate a portfolio into the LMS.
Amelia Jimenez is asking, can we also use Skype, or are there some legal challenges of using Skype with students?
I haven't heard of any legal issues around Skype at this point. We are continuing to monitor sort of what's happening with Zoom in terms of Zoom bombing. and other securities. I know Zoom is setting up, and I haven't analyzed Skype yet, but it's something to have institutions be looking for, and making sure that security measures are in place and strategies therein.
Thank you. We have a question. Are there e-journal platforms that we would recommend? This is an instructor who's looking to have her students record their experiences, both positive and not so positive, during this challenging period. And I'm not sure whether she means in writing or via video, but I wonder if any of our presenters have examples about how a faculty member could do that.
What's so nice about collaborative learning technologies is it really can be just a digital space that students create themselves. There's Blogger, there is even just a shared Google slide. There's websites using WordPress, which can be some of the standards there. You can even have students submit them via email just each week, journal number 1, journal number 2. But it's nice to have a collaborative space where you can actually make comments on that journal. And also, I think WordPress does have a blog plugin for that. Again, that's being in the open space. They may want it more private and just between you and them. So that's where you would want to make choices technologically, depending on your instance.
Also, for students who have iPhones, the voice memos are an option for people who do not want to write but want to just talk freely, and they can send those to you either by email or by text.
I want to point out really quickly, and someone I didn't see who kind of made it in the chat, is oftentimes your LMS has a lot of tools in it that many faculty aren't aware of or don't use, including kind of these kind of almost blog-like platforms or other kind of tools in there that you might want to investigate it more deeply to see if it offers something that you're looking for your course.
We're seeing a lot of terrific suggestions in the chat. I love all the sharing that goes on during these sessions. And I also have to say, it's amazing, you know, the range of roles that we see represented. We see full-time faculty, part-time faculty in all sorts of disciplines. I'm seeing advisors, folks who are working in student success centers, administrators. It's just really wonderful, the turnout we've been getting at these sessions. I have a question here from an instructor who's wondering about using video for creating and sending students exercise and physical fitness lab experiences. So the instructor wants to create a video and send it out to students, but then also he wants students to respond with their with their performance of their lab work on video. So certainly people can use their phones or tablets to take video, but what programs would our presenters recommend, or if there are participants who want to add this to the chat, how would you recommend actually sharing these videos back and forth?
There can be issues with how big the file size would be for uploading videos. LMSs can be increased in their memory size, which you can talk to your administrator about that. So there are spaces on the LMS in the discussion forum and on assignments to upload videos. Again, this is where websites could be an option for students, or a shared folder that you upload the video to. I noticed that Lori Flad, on one of our coaches, mentioned Flipgrid, and that's a great tool for quick videos and longer videos, and then you can respond to those videos, and it shows up in a card format layout on a website that you would send students to. So you would basically set up a Flipgrid site just for your class. So that's a great technology there.
Also, if you have like an institutional instance of like the Google Suite with YouTube, you can set YouTube videos to private and share them only with specific people. So that's another way you can share videos that way.
I'm seeing lots of great suggestions. If people would like to share additional questions in the chat, please do, and we're happy either to try to address them right now while we're on this session, but if not, you know, we would certainly do the research and do what we can to add ideas onto our growing resource list on the Achieving the Dream website. Susan, can I ask you to put up the slide with the screenshot of for the upcoming webinars?
Certainly.
We invite you to continue to post questions in the chat. I hope that we can take a couple more before we close out the session. But we do want to let you know that the fourth of our weekly sessions is coming up 1 week from today, Wednesday, April 15th. The title of that session is Sharing Stories of Accomplishment, Resilience, and Student Success. The registration link is posted there, and we'll also be sending it out to you after today's session. But we'll be looking for all of you, especially those who have been with us now for a few weeks in a row, to share about what has gone well. We know this has been an incredibly challenging time, so much unpredictability, so much instability, but we also know that you and your students are exhibiting tremendous resilience, and there are signs of real student success through this adversity. And we want folks to share about that, and we want to be celebrating. So we want to pause and take some time to share these stories and celebrate these accomplishments next week. The following week, Monday, April 20th, there will be a ATD-wide, so for all of Achieving the Dream, a virtual town hall. The title is Supporting Students Virtually During the COVID-19 Crisis. That'll be at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, Monday, April 20th. We'll be joined again by our President and CEO, Dr. Karen Stout, and there'll be staff from across Achieving the Dream's various areas of work. So we'll be welcoming questions on distance learning and instructional design as we have with these sessions, but also providing virtual student supports, leadership and strategy, and communication strategies. So we'd welcome your attendance and your participation in both of those upcoming sessions, and we'd certainly also love for you to share those registration links with your colleagues. We would also love to hear your feedback on today's session. There's a Qualtrics survey that you'll receive a link to in your email this afternoon. We also welcome your questions if you'd like to email us directly at teachingandlearning@achievingthedream.org. We have one question in the chat about whether we'll be repeating our earlier webinars for those of us who did not attend earlier. We won't repeat them live, but we do have recordings available. So I think when we send a follow-up email after today's session, we'll send as a reminder a link to where people can access each of those recordings of the earlier sessions. I want to thank everyone again, our presenters for today, Susan Adams, Francesca Carpenter, Richard Sebastian, our President and CEO, Dr. Karen Stout, and all of you. We had nearly 400 people online for this session today. It's wonderful to be coming together in community and in conversation, learning together. And we appreciate all the suggestions that people have been making, sharing what they are figuring out on their own in the chat. We will share the slides, the recording, and the chat so that people can continue to find these resources, and we will continue to update our resource page on the Achieving the Dream website. We thank you again for your participation today, and we hope to see you back here next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Thanks so much, everybody.